Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to a new little mini series we're going to put on called Hyperfixation, and our very first season's theme is brought to you by the pandemic, TikTok, and Dimension 20, and my brother Diesel. Shout out to him. Let's take you back to the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm on TikTok, and I come across one of Dimension 20's clips from Misfits and Magic.
Oh, good, you speak English. The next 2 minutes are going to be really important for you.
What do you do?
You have some really critical decisions to make. And the first decision that you should really consider is conceding prior to the match.
This is
Because
very
I'm
weird.
not going to hold
starting.
back. Those lunatics over there, the wizard Nazis, they
Yeah.
love my ass. They love me.
I found that very concerning. I don't
You
enjoy
should be
being here,
concerned.
but
So
like
here's the
I'm
deal.
very.
You have probably about 90 seconds now to concede, and you really got to think it through, because what's going to happen is this. I can't guarantee what's going to happen to you. There's no promise for your safety. There's no promise for anything like that.
Now.
It's not psyching out. I'm doing the kindest thing I've ever done right now.
No, it's heavy.
About 60 seconds left.
Okay.
You really should concede. If you're not going to concede, what do you want me to tell your family?
So I downloaded Dropout and I watched pretty much all of Dimension 20 and just really got deep into it. And I would text my brother a lot because he's played D&D since high school. I actually took him to buy his first rule book. So he became my touchstone of hey, what does this mean? Hey, what does that mean? And learning more and more. And then one day he texted me and said that he and his friends were starting a new campaign and wanted to see if I wanted to join. Sign me up. So that brings us to the beginning of this season. And hyperfixation, as all people with ADHD know, it's when you get into a topic or a new skill and you, for some reason in your brain, decide this is it. This is all we're going to talk about, look up, watch for weeks. And so I've learned a lot of things, and I know that others kind of go down similar wormholes, so I figure let's make the most out of this. Maybe I can spare you the hours of research and figuring things out. So very first questions right off the bat. D&D, TTRPGs, what are these things? D12, D4. What do these things mean? So we're going to walk kind of through what D&D, TTRPGs, and all those acronyms mean. We'll dive into different game systems and what those are, differences between them, what you need to play typically, and go from there. So I figure let's start small. D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, TTRPG, tabletop role-playing games. Game systems are a little built-in universe for each game that covers thematic points, it covers the rules, it covers how we play, what we use to play, and they have their own kind of guidelines for building out characters. Some of them do offer pre-made characters, or they offer pre-made villains, monsters, what have you, and then otherwise it's a pretty customizable scale for how you want to do other things. And those are all, different depending on what system you use. We'll touch on a couple different game systems later on in the series. So what you'll need to play. Most often, the very first thing you'll need to play is a rule book. Some systems you can kind of get away with just having the GM or Game Master. Dungeons & Dragons, everyone knows a Dungeon Master, but now you can use the term Game Master because that's the person running the game regardless of system. So some game systems you can get away with only the Game Master having a rule book and them kind of working through the rules as you guys play through. Or you can have a session 0, and session 0 is essentially where the Game Master brings everyone together and everyone builds their characters together. You can learn more about the world. Some systems like Kids on Brooms, for example, or Teens in Space, those are ones where the players can work together with the GM to decide what are things we want in the game, what are things we don't want in the game, how do we want these characters to work together, and what backstory do we want to accomplish in these characters. That way you can build right into your creation of your character. Backstory, more of the lore that ties into the world to make it kind of more fleshed out. And if you do session zeros, everyone is more invested both in their character, in their relationships to each other, and the world you're trying to build. So rulebook. Second thing, obviously someone to be game master. There are some game systems, like I believe it's Alice is Missing, where there is no game master and it's just a handful of people playing together. Totally fine, but most systems do require a game master or a storyteller to kind of run the show and keep things moving or woven together. Next is dice. Every system has its own set of dice. The typical traditional set is 7, where you'll have the D, or the dice, the D and then a number. So that's how many sides of dice there are. So the one we're all most familiar with is the D20, and that's a 20-sided dice. There is percentage dice, which are essentially D10s, but one has 10s and one has 1s. So when you roll them, you essentially can say, oh, it's 93. And then there is a D12, a D6, which is like a regular die that we all use for other games, a D8. So this D4 is a triangle. It's right from the top. This D4 is also a triangle, but it's red from the bottom. This D4 is like a potion bottle, but obviously when it rolls, it's just red whatever side is up. And then a D2 is essentially like a coin. So for example, this D2 has what one hand gives, the other takes away. And these two D2s are blank on one side, and then they've got a design on the front side. Also for dice, there are apps that can roll dice for you if you don't want to go and get physical dice. But I love them because, listen to this. Like, I love that. And then just like having something that just looks dope as hell just makes you feel so cool. Just having something that just looks dope as hell makes you feel so cool every time you use it. And just having something, again, tangible in your hand where you can really feel like the excitement of like, okay, am I gonna get it? Like physically rolling, I love, but some people like the kind of ease of, okay, I just have to roll 2d20, I choose 2, I choose the 20, and it rolls it automatically. Some of them add them up for you. Some will even, factor in advantage, disadvantage, things like that. And we'll touch on to what those things mean. Now, character sheets break down statistics and personality traits of characters so that you can have an easy reference guide as you play through. They've got things like charisma or attack or hit points or relationships, backstory, things like that. We can touch more on what they all have specifically and why when we go through each game system, because again, they're all different, but we can kind of glance at a couple. So here is a D&D 5e character sheet. The first page is like at a glance statistics. It's got, your hit points, weapons, personality traits, proficiencies in languages, your equipment, and all of your modifiers. On the first page, second page has more of like the backstory and places for you to make notes as your character progresses through levels. And then that last page is like a spell casting page where it keeps track of your spell slots and what spells you've got loaded, things like that. Another example of a character sheet is for Vampire the Masquerade. So it's got skills, it's got attributes, disciplines, and things like your character's clan and generation and immediate relationships. And then on the second page, it's got things like advantages and experience, things again to track your progress through the game, like possessions and notes. So Kids on Brooms has, we'll say, 1.5 character sheets. So the very first character sheet is the statistics of your character, any adversity tokens you've got some information like pronouns, name, description, your broom, your wand, because all of that factors into stats throughout the game. The half page is the class schedule. You don't have to play with a class schedule, but if you do, then that's something you'll use, hence our half rating. So now we're just going to cover kind of some general, like, often heard phrases in games. I have heard these, most of my experience is in 5e D&D, and that's, you know, what I'm going to use the most, and often that's also, you know, the most prolific for a reason, because it's the most popular. But some of these do kind of cross over, so we're going to cover just like the most often used. If there's anything that's often used specifically for a system, we'll talk about it in that system's episode. Rolling with advantage or with disadvantage is two sides of the same coin. For that one, you can either roll one d20 twice, or roll 2 at the same time and roll the higher for advantage or pick the lower for disadvantage. And that affects things like attack rolls or saves and checks. So death saves are when your character is at 0 hit points or dies, and you roll a d20. Again, most checks are with a d20 in D&D 5e. So you roll it, and if it's a 10 or above, you save. If it's below a 10, you fail. 3 saves is success, so you stabilize at 0 hit points. 3 fails is automatic death, permanent death, unless, of course, there's other things mechanically that one can do after someone dies, but that's what a death save is. Oops. So we're going to talk about DC, saves, and checks. Those all kind of combine. So a DC is essentially a difficulty class. It's a number that the GM sets for you to be able to do the thing. A save is what you have to roll for a thing not to happen to you, and a check is what you roll to be able to do that thing. It's bare bones. We're going to break it down. So let's say I want to climb a building. It's a pretty high building, so the GM will say, okay, to climb that building, it's a DC 15, and it's an acrobatics, so I have to roll the dice, and then I look at my acrobatics number on the character sheet and combine that with what I've rolled on the dice. If I make it to that number or higher, I accomplish the task. Great. If I miss it, then I've failed. And the GM may say in turn, okay, then roll me a DC 10 dexterity check to save yourself so that you don't just fall off the building. Then you've got to hit that save number with the combination of your dice and your dexterity modifier. We'll dive a little more into that when we cover D&D in depth, and we kind of go through the character sheet and what the numbers mean and how to use it. Next is campaign. So a campaign is essentially the storyline that you're playing. Some people have decades-long campaigns. Some people just have a short little campaign, like a one-off campaign, or I think it's a one-shot, where essentially you're just playing for a session or two. So the campaign is the long overarching theme and story you're telling. A session is each individual time your group sits down together to play. So campaign versus session. PC is a player character, and an NPC is a non-player character that the GM or typically plays. They call it a cast of 1,000 people, just one person. That's the GM. Every player only gets to play one person. That's why they're PCs. And the GM essentially fills in the rest of the world, both with plot points and villains and just background characters. That's all in the GM. And we'll have a whole episode of the things that they've got to keep track of. I'm definitely sure that there's more that we're going to dive into, but I also didn't want to jam too much into this. I wanted to kind of hit the touch points. These are the things that we're going to talk about in these game systems, how to do them, and go from there. So I landed on this hyperfixation because it was something that I've always wanted to do, and I guess back in the day I thought it was too hard or too labor intensive or never too weird, because I am a very weird person. But this is always on my bucket list of things to do, and this shirt from Paula's Pixels really nails it as to why I wanted to get into it. a little bit of luck, some math, and a lot of improv. And really, that's D&D and other tabletop role-playing games in a nutshell. You know, you roll the dice, that's the luck. The math is adding things together, figuring out, can I do this thing? How much damage is that other thing? And then a lot of improv. It's a lot of character work. And D&D 5th edition, or 5e as it's known, kind of came away from the really number heavy iterations in the past and really opens it up to more of the role playing. And I think that that's brilliant, because that is the vehicle by which all the other things happen. If there's no storytelling happening, then there's nowhere for you to go. Literally, like in video games or in a movie or anything, if there's not a story, then there's no motivation to do anything. If you booted up a video game and there was nothing to do, you'd turn it off. There was a show that was just sitting there and nothing happened, you'd turn it off. Same with these games. You get out of them what you put into them. And as time goes on, you have more and more, and it has a life of its own, and it's literal world building, which is a cornerstone of it all. And those are all things that really drew me in. The unpreparedness. Like, you can prep. Like the GM can prep a whole session and outline, these are the things that I want to happen or I think is going to happen and I want to be prepared. And none of those things happen. Or you can be like, this is what I think my character is and who they are and what their motivations are. And then over the course of a couple sessions, it's now taken a life of its own. It's completely different. That is super cool to me. Plus, again, the lizard brain of I'm into it. So if you want to play and you're kind of on the fence of like, well, how do I begin? Keep in mind, experienced players want to play. You know, they want to help get other people into their hobby. And if they're gatekeepers, you don't want to hang out with them anyway, which I know sounds kind of like very fortune cookie-y, where it's like, oh, well, you don't want to hang out with those people anyway. Well, yeah, but then if those were the only people I know of who plays the game and they don't want me to play, or I don't want to play with them, then where am I? Get your own rule book. They're online, or you can go to like a gaming store near you. Sometimes they're like fantasy game or comic book stores that also have a gaming section. GameStop doesn't really have anything because that's like video gaming, but if you Google TTRPG or just like fantasy gaming store, that'll probably tell you ones near you. That way you can go in person. You can also ask if they have any like gaming nights. Sometimes they also serve as like a hub. One near me has mini figure painting nights where people can bring their figurines that they've made or purchased, and then they can paint it, and it's like a big networking kind of meeting friends who also like the thing that you like. There are plenty of online games as well. I believe Roll20 is one where they've got new games that are happening all the time. And I say, even if all you do is a couple friends and you gather around for a hangout night and you just kind of play through character creation, that can be enough to kind of get the itch going. That can also help you get a feel for like, what do I want? Like, what do I want to learn more of? Like, do I like this game because it's more storytelling? Do I want to get into the more like pre-made rules and like bumpers and really boundaries made, or do I kind of want a free-flowing thing? The only way to figure it out is experimentation. So I hope you stick with me through the rest of this season. We learn more about game systems and how those are played and pros and cons of each, and really just kind of vibe through the rest of the season. Catch you next time. Comment down below if you play, if you want to play, any questions you have. Like and subscribe. That way you are along for the ride for the rest of the series, season, and other shenanigans I get into. And I'll see you next time. Bye.